Well, hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. And you are here for another AASR Live, our live video podcast series that we do. And we've got an exciting program in store for you today, as always. Those of you that might not know who we are or who I am, the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint is a nonprofit organization that we started about 4.5 years ago. Time flies. And we do a lot of work around punitive discipline, around responses to behavior. While our work started really about things like restraint seclusion, it's really broader than that. It's often about restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, very often the things that are being done to kids and youth, often in the name of behavior. And we believe that we can do better. So we do a lot of work about trying to highlight better ways of supporting kids and youth, moving away from outdated behavioral and crisis management approaches that aren't only not effective, but are often causing harm. So anyway, if you don't know more about us and you'd like to learn more about us, go to our website, which is endseclusion.org, and you can learn a lot more about who we are there. I do want to tell you a couple things about our show today. Of course, I say that I'm always excited, and I am. I'm always excited, and have two really amazing guests with us today. So you get two for the price of one here. You know, we've got two amazing guests. We have Stephanie, Izzi, and Sarah Hamel joining us today. I should actually rephrase that and say Dr. Stephanie Izzi joining us and Sarah Hamel. And they're going to be talking a little bit about different approaches that they've been using to support and work with non-speaking and echolalic communicators. They might talk a little bit about collaborative proactive solutions, but other things that they're doing as well. This is a topic that I've been looking forward to, and I know a lot of other people have been looking forward to as well. We're really excited to have them here today. So I do want to let you know, and I see in the comments, we already have a couple comments here. Somebody wants to learn more about joining, we'll certainly provide you information there. But if you are watching live right now, even if you aren't, I don't care, you can tell us anyway. I'd love to know who you are and where you're from in the chat. So if you would, go into the chat, tell me who you are and where you're from. And those of you that are regular followers of our show, if you're watching, you might notice that I am not in my regular place. I'm not in my home. I am not in my office. I'm actually right now in West Virginia as I'm helping my son get moved into college. So a lot of exciting things going on, but yes, that is a refrigerator behind me with an Alliance magnet on it. So, we're in a totally different world right now. So great to see some people already joining in and telling us where they're from. And with that, I want to give you a couple announcements, and then we will introduce our guest. I do want to let you know, as always, we always record these programs. So these programs go out live on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. But we also record them on all of those platforms. So you can go back and you can watch them later. We also make it available as an audio podcast. So if you want to listen on the go, it's easier while you're in your car or you're working out. You can download our podcast on iTunes, on Google Play, on Spotify, anywhere you get podcasts, you should be able to find it as well. And I will just take a moment to see that we have a couple of people that have checked in already. And it's great to see people checking in. Let's just take a look here. Oh, okay. Neurodivergent by nature, excited to be here from beautiful West Coast of Canada. And I had the opportunity to be on the West Coast of Canada a few months ago. Fantastic. Okay, fantastic. We've got somebody here from Rhode Island. Where else do we have people joining us from? Self-advocate, parent, family coach, and longtime follower here. Okay, excellent. Ontario, Canada. We've got a lot of folks from Canada today. West Virginia University alumni here. Go Mountaineers. Okay, awesome. So we've got a lot of people joining in, telling us who they are and where they're from. I've got a mother here of a child with autism and a member of an advocacy group, Spear. And okay, we've got Devana from Connecticut. So we've got a lot of people joining us. So let's get to the exciting part. I want to introduce to you today our very special guest and get to what you're really here for, which is to hear this amazing presentation you're going to hear. So let me begin, and I'm going to give you a little secret. These two are actually related. These two are actually sisters, and I've had the chance to meet them, gosh, some time ago. I think it was a couple of years ago. You had connected through the Alliance, and we talked and had a great conversation, and have gotten to talk and try to collaborate ever since. And of course, I'm always pointing people your direction, saying, hey, I know these amazing sisters that are doing this incredible work. So we'll talk a little bit about your background. So let me do your introduction here, and then we'll talk a little bit more. So Dr. Stephanie Izzi is the co-founder and executive director of Autism Included, an autistic adult herself. Stephanie uses her unique insight into neurodivergent communication and learning to support inclusion for autistic students. Stephanie works as a speech therapist, autistic inclusion specialist, augmented alternative communication or AAC expert. Her background as a research scientist provides a unique approach to their work, combining evidence-based practice and practice-based evidence. I love that, to drive her workshop and practice. Stephanie completed their PhD in genetics at Stony Brook University and MS in communication science and disorders from Massachusetts General Hospital. And then we have Sarah. Sarah Hamel is the co-founder and director of strategic initiatives at Autism Included, where she spends her time building a coalition of individuals and organizations passionate about inclusion for autistic students, particularly our youngest learners. She is always on the lookout for partnerships to expand the collective capacity for change. In addition, she continues to practice as a speech pathologist, specializing in autistic learning and development, including AAC. In her free time, it's hard to imagine you have any, she enjoys making music, writing, and listening to funny podcasts. So I've already learned something that I guess I knew about you, but must have forgotten. But so I didn't know that you made music, or else I would have said you could have done a musical intro for us. Maybe it's not too late for that, so we can always think about that. So I want to first of all welcome you both. You are two amazing people that are doing. I mean, I read your intro, but I know more, and I know like you started a school and you're following something you're really passionate about, and you're doing things and making change that I think is really important in this world. So Stephanie, Sarah, welcome, and thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us. I feel in preparation, I went back and listened to the back catalog of these, and I feel like I'm streaming among giants. This is such an incredible series that I'm just really excited to be a part of it. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
You guys are giants to me. So you're in the company you belong in.
Thank you,
Stephanie, and fantastic to have you here. I know for a fact that you are right now looking at your presentation because you can't see us,
Yes.
but we can see you. But Stephanie, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all you do. We're really excited about this.
Thanks, me too.
So I'm just going to look real quick and see that we have a couple more comments that I'll just mention before we get started. Adele, parent to autistic kiddos and autistic SLP from Memphis, Tennessee. We've got Trisha, a regular listener and community member here from Idaho. We've got Cass Griffin Bennett, who I think you've actually both met and collaborated with, autistic and ADHD mom of autistic young kids, including a non-speaking 4-year-old. Who started on robust high-tech AAC at the age of 2 in Washington. So, and also a Alliance volunteer. So we've got some great people watching here live, and you've got an exciting presentation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring your presentation up on the screen, and those of the rest of the world that's watching right now, they will see your presentation and they will see the three of us. You have agreed that you're happy to take questions during the presentation. And what that means is I'm going to hang around, but I'm going to be quiet unless questions pop up, or maybe there's a question that pops up in my mind. And if we have questions, I will bring those up on the screen and I will give you an opportunity to respond to those. If we get to a point where we've got so many questions that we need to hit the pedal to the metal and finish the presentation, we can do that as well. You just let me know. But we're in for, I think, an hour or so of a fantastic presentation. I know people have expressed a really strong interest in this topic because I think there's some gaps in information that are out there right now, and people looking for information. So with that, your slide deck is up, and I'm going to be quiet and let you take it away. And I'll just break in every once in a while as we have questions. And again, remind you that are listening or watching right now live, you can put questions in the chat at any time, and we'll try to get through those as we can. And of course, if you haven't already introduced yourself, let us know who you are and where you're from. And with that, Sarah and Stephanie, take it away.
Thank you so much. And we had a great introduction from you. Just to say, we started as speech language pathologists in public schools, and we're also both parents. So we have a lot of different perspectives going into this. But we've seen kind of firsthand the seclusion and restraint that can happen in schools, particularly in the autistic population, and particularly in the non-speaking or echolalic autistic population. So it's kind of personal and professional for us. So we, like I said, we have a lot of perspectives.
So when we think about, I just wanted to briefly touch on why, as a group of people concerned with seclusion and restraint in general, why should we be especially concerned with seclusion, the use of these practices with the non-speaking and echolalic population? First of all, we know it's happening, seclusion and restraint. We also know it's chronically underreported. We know that these practices have the potential to cause very great harm that's long lasting, including physical harm, emotional harm, not that those are distinct necessarily from each other. And we also know that seclusion and restraint practices disproportionately affect children with disabilities. Figures usually are around 78 to 80% of seclusion and restraint events are toward a person with a disability. And oftentimes those people are in segregated settings, and no one is able to report other than the staff. So you kind of have an event happening to a child, that child can't report, and none of the other kids can necessarily report either. Relationships-based approaches like collaborative problem solving are touted as one of the best ways to address challenging behaviors, and that's been borne out in research. And absolutely, they are very good, effective approaches. But parents of non-speaking and echolalic children are left wondering, where does my child fit into this? If it's a technique that's relying on verbal communication, can my child even participate in this? And that's where we saw the need in practice to have something overlaid onto these approaches. And we call it the Autism Included model. Oh, yes, sorry, that animation was supposed to come first. Can my child participate? Yes, they can.
Just to jump in and clarify. So our approach is based on a lot of Ross Green's work with collaborative and proactive solutions. We're not trained practitioners of that particular approach, but we use a lot of that philosophy, and we'll talk about the other philosophies and foundations of the work we do around behavior, particularly in this population. But we do, as Guy said in our introduction, we do have a school now. We have children of our own. We have a school now where we are working with students who fit that profile. And we use a lot of these philosophies to as the foundation for our approach to what would be called behavior, right? And this might be familiar to a lot of you, the reframing of behavior, that kids do well when they can. And so shifting that mindset to kids are being defiant or lazy, to that they're having difficulty meeting expectations of adults, right? So when there are stressors, you can reduce them. When there are unmet needs or lagging skills, or however you want to frame it, the child, for whatever reason, can't meet the adult's expectation in the moment. And so they're demonstrating a behavior. And so the responsibility sort of shifts from the child to the adult in that situation. What can the adult do to help the child meet expectations? So some of the other things that are sort of supporting the approach that we have are, again, neuroscience and psychology of co-regulation, the fact that rewards and discipline and a lot of the behavioral approaches don't necessarily work and don't generalize and don't work long-term. I also would shout out the work of Amanda Diekman with low demand parenting.
I was just going to say, we have to give a shout out to Cass in the chat, who was the one that introduced us to Amanda Diekman's work. And I felt like I had so many missing years. I was like, this is great. I love it. So thank you.
Really, really good. And a great follow on Facebook. But again, when you think about these approaches, we think of lagging skills. And for children who are non-speaking or echolalic, you'd probably put language as one of those lagging skills. I would push back on that a little bit, but obviously the communication that some of our children have is not effective in the moment. It's hard. And even for kids who have a lot of language skills, when they're in that situation where they're demonstrating a behavior, language isn't always accessible for them, right? So language is one of those skills that you might identify as needing support in that moment. There's a challenging behavior and an expectation of the adult. So the child is demonstrating some behavior, the adult has an expectation that isn't being met. And the idea is that you're going to collaborate with your child on coming up with a solution that's mutually agreed upon that works for both, to meet that expectation. And so what we're bringing to this is that those solutions and how you get there has to be autism informed, and it has to use a total communication approach. So we're really going to talk about what those are the two key pieces, what that means. So first, I'm just going to go quickly through the differences between communication, language, and speech, right? So we're talking about non-speaking students, echolalic students. Everyone has communication. It's just sending messages that contain information. So you can use behavior as communication, a facial expression. Everyone communicates in a variety of ways, including these non-linguistic ways. So that's a clear expression of something's disgusting. Someone takes a bite of something and makes that face, you kind of get that message. It requires no symbolism, no language. Language is a symbolic form of communication. It also involves social interactions. And you can have an emoji or written language or spoken language. A lot of AAC platforms are linguistic. So there's symbols on a tablet that a child can touch and it might say the word, or pictures on a board. There's a lot of variations on that approach. And that's the augmentative and alternative communication devices are not always, but often linguistic in that way. Sign language is a language. And speech is a spoken form of language, right? So that requires everything to be working, muscles and brain coordination to produce the speech sounds in the language that you're speaking. So those three things are different. And when you're collaborating with children who are non-speaking, who do not yet have a really robust language system, you're using all forms of communication. You can be speaking, you can be using your expressions and your body language and your positioning and posturing and all of these things to communicate, and so can the child that you're communicating with.
And so I would just throw out there that all of us use all of these forms. Anyone uses non-spoken communication. You write things, you're using symbols in your environment. We use obviously nonverbal communication, totally non-linguistic, non-symbolic communication. If I take a bite of something, you know what I mean. That's nonverbal communication. And obviously I'm a person that uses speech, but I should say most people will kind of seamlessly travel through all of these forms of communication. So it's not like we have to totally reinvent the wheel when we're working with a child who primarily uses one of these modalities. It's something you already have the capacity to model for them and engage with them in that place because you're already doing it.
So you might have heard the phrase behavior is a form of communication, and that is sometimes true. Sometimes a child or you or whoever is doing a behavior that is intended to send a message. So I think of things like a child takes a toy from another child, they hit, their kid that took their toy, they're angry, they're expressing that, they're mean to express it, and they're really clear about it. That's a form of communication. But sometimes it's just an indicator of something internal. Kid's really excited and they do something, or they're in pain or they're hungry, and that's causing a behavior. It could be a reaction to something in the environment that's, causing a certain behavior to occur. The bright lights are distracting, or there's a noise that I hear that, is causing me to do some behavior. But all of these factors are interactive, and the behavior is the observable thing that's giving information, right? So that goes two ways. I can provide information with my behavior. I can interpret behavior to kind of get at what the problem is when we're talking about challenging behaviors.
Hey, Stephanie, if I could just interject something here real quick, kind of on that last slide. Of course, we've been hearing that a lot, the idea that behavior is communication. And, I also happen to be a big fan of Stuart Shanker's work and research. And one of the things that he says that's always resonated with me is the idea that, behavior is biology, right? When we think about communication, sometimes we think very intentionally, that people are trying to communicate something. And when we think about behavior being biology, being, it's neurotransmitters, it's hormones, it's our threat detection system, it takes away that fact that, not all behavior, even though it may be communicating something, I think people sometimes equate communication with a intent. And I think it's really important to make that point with people that sometimes this bottom up, it's our body, it's our nervous system. And it's happening on behalf of us. Anyway, I always love that thought. I'm kind of curious your take on that.
Yeah, no, I would say you could try to teach Sarah not to jump and scream when she sees a spider. And she's worked really hard on that. It happened. Like, that is a startle, right? It's something that is kind of not volitional. And so I think that is a really good point, that the what I'm trying to get at here is it's not always under the control of the person doing the behavior.
And it's not always what they wish were happening or what they would want to be expressing in that moment. Like, I don't want to scream that way, but it's just it's happening to you, it's coming through you, really. And it's still valuable information. I think that piece of intent is so huge, to recognize that while it's still important information, it's communicating something to us. Just because it's not intentional doesn't mean it doesn't count.
That's and this gets at sort of drilling down into, why is a child not meeting an expectation? Why are they doing that behavior? And there's lots of, ways of thinking about behavior, right? There's lots of ways to break it down and categorize it. And I'm not really concerned about which way you're using, other than to be really broad about it, right? Like, it could be something going on inside of a child or something in the environment that's causing the behavior. And a lot of it has to do with communication and relationships, that, a child who doesn't have other ways of expressing, or an adult who doesn't have other ways of expressing, sometimes it's, you can't help but do the behavior. And sometimes it is just, this is the only way I have of expressing something, or communicating something, or it's what I want to do. I need control over that thing. So there are many ways of thinking about why a behavior might be occurring. And that gets at this idea of, when we're doing an approach that requires thinking about what are the skills that the child doesn't have to meet the expectation, right? What are the causes of the behavior, and how do we find a solution that's beneficial to both of us without necessarily a robust amount of language? We do something called co-construction, and that is sort of where we're starting. So we form a hypothesis about why the behavior is occurring, and then we use autism-informed and relationships-based communication approaches to co-construct the reason and the solution kind of at the same time. And this process is really responsive. So it has to kind of occur in the moment, usually, or around a particular situation. And we might be wrong, and it might take some back and forth with the child to collaborate on that solution. But
that's why oh, sorry, I was just going to jump in and say, that's why I feel like the piece of responsiveness is so critical, because I feel like a lot of folks might feel like they can form a hypothesis, they can test the hypothesis, but if you're wrong, how do you recognize you're wrong while the behavior is continuing? How are you able to pivot? Having that basis of understanding, and we'll talk about the specific thinking and learning and communication differences with the autistic learner, or the autistic person. Having that background allows you to make better informed hypotheses that are responsive to that particular child and what is going into that for them.
And involving the child. So co-construction is a collaborative process. So we'll get into some examples and it might make it clearer, but you're not just saying like, oh, the child can't share their toys, so I'm taking all the toys away. That's not, that would be a hypothesis. You could test it that way, but that's what we're trying to do, is use all those principles of respect and autonomy and all of those relationships-based approaches to come up with a solution that we're really working with the child to implement. So the point isn't to get a child to understand what your expectation is. That is not really the point. It's not to get them to accept your solution. It really is that collaborative process that involves both you and the child you're working with, and it's a relationship. So just to give an example, so this is an example where we kind of hypothesized that this was something going on internally with this student. We had a child who was throwing shoes. So our expectation was, okay, shoes stay on your feet. That was the expectation we had at the beginning.
They were his shoes, just to clarify. He wasn't like going stealing shoes. He was taking his shoes off and chucking them.
This was in our classroom. So, okay, our first hypothesis is, oh, he doesn't like his shoes on. Okay, or the shoe isn't on right, something's wrong. So we're showing this child his shoes, trying to see if he wants us to put them back on his feet, offering him an AAC device with pictures of clothing items. So we opened that up, and he would push shoes and then socks, shirt, pants. You'd go through all the clothing. So he's talking about clothing. I'm like, something's going with the shoes. So, okay, we're co-constructing this solution. Let's say you don't have to wear your shoes right now. We'll put them in this cubby. Can't throw them, but we can put them over here. Anytime we'd go to put the shoes back on, he would throw them. So like, that wasn't quite it. He doesn't care about putting them in the cubby. That didn't solve this problem. Do you not like these shoes? So we worked with the student's family, and they got different shoes. They actually measured his foot, went a size up, and we found there was a little mark on his toe, and the shoes were pinching him. His foot hurt. So this required a lot of back and forth. But, the solution wasn't just to say, okay, you can't throw the shoes, I'm taking the shoes away. It was a very collaborative process, and we ended up discovering the kid's foot hurt. And then we can model that language. You can model language on top of it and see if you're correct. So I think that was that process. It ended up being something going on. He was in pain, and that was the way he was telling us. Another example was a student who was having what you would call a meltdown behavior, just screaming and not wanting to go into the classroom and running away from the classroom. We would expect that this student would eventually go into the classroom. So at first we thought he just didn't want to leave his parent, which, is not an uncommon thing for students. So we're like, let's have the parent come in with the child to say goodbye, and we'll see if that helps. And it really didn't. This child was still
And that
upset.
was very surprising for this particular student who we know very well. This particular morning, it was like, we just could not fathom what the problem could be. Yeah. And everyone was scratching their heads because the fact that they wouldn't transition in with mom, I was like, that's so, I can't, the wheels start going like, why, what is going on? And then I literally slapped myself in the face when we finally got to it. So
I think a lot of that is the curiosity piece too. So like, not panicking, not saying we have to solve this behavior. It's very much like, what is it? What can we do to help? So we walked him outside. Someone went back inside and tried to look around, and we ended up finding a vacuum cleaner. And the second that moved, he got more upset when he saw it. So we put that away. We showed him we were putting it away, and he was fine. He went into the class. That was something we didn't even notice it, didn't see it in the classroom. It took a while to find out what was wrong. We tried a bunch of different things. That ended up being the issue.
And just to throw out there, to be kind to yourself if you're also a neurodivergent person, the problem was no one noticed a vacuum in the middle of the room. There was a vacuum there that wasn't there before, and I didn't notice it. Nobody noticed it. Kind of just blended in.
We'd gone vacuum blind at that point. It wasn't on. It wasn't on, so we would have thought the sound we would have kind of noticed more often, but it wasn't on. But that was still really upsetting, and so we modeled language around that. But the more you do this, you're building a relationship of trust with whoever you're working with or living with or whoever it is, and it's communication, right? They're communicating something to you, you're communicating it to them, and you're trying different things, and it's again very collaborative. And we shift, and the onus to shift is on the adult, right? Like that, we're going to try a different thing. We'll figure this out. Another one is,
I had to interrupt for 1 second. I mean, the onus to shift is on the adult. like underline multiple times. That's such an important point, because so often we look at the onus being on the child, like the child has to be the one to change, when in fact, in so many of these conversations, it really is about the adult. Anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
yeah,
it's so critical.
Because my assumption isn't, not only isn't this child not able to do this, but there's a reason they're not able to do it, and we can help find out what that reason is. And maybe it's an unrealistic expectation. We'll get into that in a minute. But you know, some of these things we have to do and some we don't. But the onus is definitely on the adult. Why is this not working? Why is what I'm doing not working? Why don't you understand all of these things? So another one that's not uncommon is hitting people, and in this case, hitting people and then laughing about it. This one may or may not have been my own child, so that's different, and other kids we've worked with. So the expectation is, you can't, you know, you can phrase this however you'd like. It's a safety issue. You can't hit people. That's an expectation. I wouldn't let someone hit you. All of those things. You can phrase that however you would like, but you can't hit people. So our first hypothesis is, okay, is it sensory? Does this child need to hit things? Is this fun? Are they getting sensory input? So, okay, let's demonstrate other things you can hit. You can hit the couch. We have lots of things to hit and throw and jump on. A lot of things available to kids for that sensory piece. But that didn't quite work. It was really just, we want to hit the adult in this case.
Just really funny
about it. So maybe what I'm communicating with that is, it's really funny. So does this kid think it's really funny? And so there's a couple of ways you can approach that. But I think another thing we'll talk about with the like autism informed responsiveness and neurodivergence informed responsiveness, you can try to teach a child that it isn't funny, but it is to this kid, right? So like we didn't go that route. We made a game where we taught the reaction is what's funny, right? So really drilling down into what is exactly the thing that this kid's getting out of this. And it's the reaction. So when this child was hitting and it was surprising and you'd get a big reaction, and then often it would be like, no, a really stern reaction, which was also really funny. So we made a game out of getting a big reaction with a gentle tap, not a hit, like not hitting someone so it hurt them. And then, you know, we also work around consent. So not doing this with everyone, just doing it with people who are inviting you to play this game. So that worked really well. And the hitting, slapping straight across the face went away. And it's now this game that we can kind of engage in with consent from both people. That is still really funny. So that gets us to our other two really big key takeaways, that any expectation an adult has to be meaningful to the child, particularly with neurodivergent kids. They have to understand why in some way. They don't have to be able to verbalize it. They don't have to be able to express why, but they have to have it has to be a functional reason for them. And any interpretation of a message or solution has to be autism informed, and that can look different. For, you know, it's really.
And I would say it has to be autism informed, or it's very unlikely you're going to get it right. Yeah. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter.
And so we'll talk about what those two things mean. So we had an expectation at a school we were working in that a child would do writing homework. And it was, this kid can't spell, doesn't do writing homework, just wants to do whatever they want, and they just like to do what they want. And so the kid drew a picture, and I was like, what's that a picture of? I wonder, is it a cat? And I just listed things, and then they just wrote this on their own and then signed it after with their name. So, you know, you can do different things. When you sit down with writing homework and the student didn't understand why they were doing this homework, it's very unlikely that I'm going to be motivated to do it, but we expect kids to do that a lot. So tying the reason for the expectation to the child in some way is really important. We'll have that in a lot of examples.
Isn't some of that, I mean, just treating kids like they're human, right? I mean,
yeah, well, yes,
I mean, you know, if it would be hard for us, we can't expect it to be easy for kids, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it's this thought of like, what I've heard a lot, and I'm sure many people in the space have heard a lot, is like, oh, well, they have to learn that life is terrible and you have to do stuff you don't want to do a lot, which is not true in my life. Like, I don't generally do a ton of things. Some things, absolutely. But yeah, that seems to be like I, as your parent or your teacher, I have to instill that in you, rather than just letting you kind of in a supported way absorb the natural consequences of the world. I think we try to fabricate it.
And we'll talk about that. There are always times that you have to do things you don't want to do, and there are ways to support both adults and kids through that. But
we also live in a world where you don't always have to do things you don't want to do. I mean, I've heard many things in IEP meetings given as examples of like the real world, I mean, even things like, if it's very hard for you to be around a lot of people, well, what about the real world? Well, you know what? Right now you can get on Instacart and have your groceries delivered to your house. I mean, there are things that we can do, and there are solutions, and sometimes we force things, anyway. I did want to get to a couple of comments here real quick just to share as we're going. Let's see. Divina says, reminds me of what we used to do with a crying infant, trying to determine all the issues. It's trial and error, right? You try things. Another great comment here, and I love the combination of words here. Yes, the persistence and curiosity as to what the reason is. And really that's it. It's about being curious. Being curious means so much as an adult caregiver, right?
It's really the crux of it, right? Like, just instead of reacting, and I'm a parent also, that panic, I won't call it panic even, but like the reaction, you're a human too, right? The adult in this situation is also human. So your reactions aren't always perfectly curious and not detached from all emotion. It's hard. But I think that the curiosity driving your interactions with these students, and a respect for them as humans, and a love for your children in whatever form that takes.
It's like operating under the assumption that you have a reason I don't understand. There's a reason I don't understand, and I want to. And I want to. Just if the child believes you have a desire for understanding, I think that's a tremendous propeller of progress. It's like they will hang with you longer if you've demonstrated to them over time, I don't get this, but I'm trying. Even if you're not successful with some of these things, the effort matters. Like, it does register. That's been my clinical experience. It matters tremendously.
And it matters to all of us, right? And it matters to us as adults, and it matters to everyone. And that's the thing. I mean, I think also assumptions are. Oh, Sarah disappeared.
Sorry, I had to let my dog in.
You were going.
Keep crying. Keep crying.
It's all good. But even when we, when we make assumptions, and there's a lot of assumptions like about behavior, well, they're seeking attention, they're doing this, they're doing that. And curiosity, in my opinion, goes a lot further than making assumptions and assuming intent, and sometimes intent that isn't there, right?
Yes.
And I think we're going to talk about autism informed, like, what does that mean next? But the thing I think I didn't realize, people in general don't realize, is that, especially if you're not an autistic person yourself, the assumptions you're making, like if you look at a situation and you're taking something out of, you're wrong a lot. That's just like, I learned of myself. I was like, oh, wow, I was very wrong. It's just, you can't fathom what's going on in there sometimes until you learn, until you do the work. You're not going to come up with it yourself, the thing that they're thinking.
We're making this really clinical, but it's also the basis of relationships, right? Like, I'm curious and I care about you. But we will talk about autistic behavior specifically. And I just liked this cartoon because it illustrates the fact that we're kind of making all of these assumptions about the purpose of these behaviors and just reinforcing them by saying, okay, you did the behavior, therefore I was right about all of my assumptions about all of this.
I like the cartoon too.
So that's where we get into all these barriers. Like, I want to do all of these collaborative approaches with my students or my child, but they don't have the language to understand me and they can't express all of these things, and they're too inflexible, and they're just, stuck in these loops or whatever it is. And all these professionals have told me that my autistic child, can only learn by these highly structured rewards and punishments, right? And so that becomes this huge barrier. And our whole idea is that we, as we have a clinic, we have a speech therapy clinic, and we don't have any treatments for autism. We don't believe autism is an issue at all. But it's important, for a variety of reasons, to understand the differences in how autistic children, individuals, might communicate, learn, and connect with other people. And that'll solve a lot of your problem. And so there are some things, and we have this on our website, so we'll go through it briefly. Different ways of thinking about autism and neurodivergence that might help kind of start a journey on understanding how autistic brains might work differently than other brains. One is this idea of monotropism, which, if you haven't heard that term, it's this idea that autistic brains tend to focus on a small number of really internally driven interests at a time. So shifting attention is really uncomfortable and sometimes almost impossible. There's this drive to focus on interest is the word that is used in a lot of these papers, but it's like a focus. So we talk about like a flashlight of attention, and it's hard to shift outside of the beam of the flashlight.
And what I always tell people is, like, what we're always trying to do is, rather than, think about their attention stream as the light, like you're in a dark room, the light that's created by your flashlight is their attention stream. Don't try to wrestle the flashlight out of their hand. Try to get in the light. That is how having an understanding of how their brain is working is going to help you, because trying to get the attention away from them it feels like trying to move the earth sometimes, like that, but it's not impossible to get in there. You get in there. And the other thing I would point out, I see your asterisk, it's not just interest. Like, what that means is you can have a person who is, their monotropism is showing up as a really focused, deep attention to a topic, but it can also be like our friends who might really like intensely visually inspect something or be very focused on a detail or a feature of a physical thing. It's the same idea. It's that monotropic sort of attention stream, and it's not a problem. It's just something to know, something you have to know about them to teach that person effectively.
Yeah. The other really big idea is what's called the double empathy problem, which is really just describing how, it's interesting. It's describing how autistic and often neurodivergent people are often seen as being unable to communicate or having struggles with communication. But a lot of research is showing that they can communicate pretty well with other autistic people. It's just that when neurotypical and autistic people are trying to communicate with one another, that there's a breakdown in communication, which just highlights the fact that it's not just on the autistic person to resolve these issues, right? To fix the communication or to meet the expectation. It's really important to emphasize it's two ways. And so I just had this little slideshow, like the two neurotypical brains, totally fine communicating with one another. Two autistic brains, also totally fine communicating with one another. Often those messages are sent. Even, I don't know how many studies have been done specifically in non-speaking autistic populations, but often I would think that is similar. There's just a way of interpreting these communicative messages, however they're sent, that like it's almost like a culture, right? So like your cultural expectations are similar if you're autistic, and so you can kind of pick up on the nuances better. But when you're kind of living in another culture, it's harder. There are these unspoken things that you're just not aware of. But the culture is mostly neurotypical, so it does make it seem like the problem is with the autistic brain, but it's not really. A couple of other things is really good pattern recognition. So that quick making connections, sometimes connections that you wouldn't expect. Autistic brains can sometimes generate patterns that you wouldn't expect and process patterns in a different way. So they're making a lot of connections sometimes. And then the sensory processing and interoception considerations. So you might have people that are under or oversensitive to sensory states, or have difficulty perceiving when they're hungry or when they're hurt. There is evidence that they're highly susceptible to forms of anxiety that are often overlooked in autistic students. And then you get into communication with autistic individuals. A lot of language development is what's called Gestalt or Echolalic. And this is often meaningful alternate path of language development. So you can look up these stages of language development for echolalic autistic students or children, and it's often leads to really meaningful language acquisition, but it's hard to interpret in the moment. And so you have kids that are scripting or using gestalts, these like long phrases that don't always mean what they seem to mean, right? And they can be used for a variety of communicative or non-communicative purposes, so that can be hard too. And then apraxia of speech. So childhood apraxia of speech has been shown to be an appropriate diagnosis in as many as 2/3 of autistic children. And what that is, if you don't know, is a motor speech difficulty where the brain and the articulators that we use, it's a really smooth process and a really quick process that has to be automatic. And for someone with apraxia, it's not. And so their brain and their articulators, their mouth, aren't communicating with each other to form words. And so that can be an underlying cause of why some autistic children and adults are not speaking. But if you overlay that on a difference in language and a difference in communication and all of these other differences, it can look really, really different. So that's some of the things that inform, for those who aren't autistic naturally, it can inform your interpretation of autistic behavior. So an example of autism-informed communication through a behavior lens is we were working with a child who was just attacking a radiator a lot of the time. And so a lot of our hypotheses are around, there's some like radiators making a sound. We like the sound that it makes when we hit the radiator. It's also, like we got drum kits in because we didn't want this child to get burned on a radiator. So we got drum kits in, we got other things to hit, none of it worked. And we're like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. And this gets at kind of the whole picture where you're really looking at observing and being curious and asking other people, and maybe looking at different times of the day. So this kid was yelling and hitting this radiator. It looked really angry. And so we thought it was a negative, and then we're like, maybe we like hitting it, maybe it's musical. We all these hypotheses going on, and none of them worked. And so we're thinking about, okay, what is he doing? Where does this occur? Have I seen this before? And we're like, I've seen this before over and over. I'm just watching and I'm like, I've seen this before. And it turns out this kid liked to watch this clip, which is a clip from Singing in the Rain, where someone's hitting a piano with a hat, and it makes a kind of similar sound to when he was hitting the radiator. So that is how, it took a while to make that connection, to be honest, because we weren't saying the words. It wasn't exactly the same, but that was the connection that this child had made. And so we brought in a bunch of hats and something that made a similar sound to the radiator, and that worked to replace that behavior.
And it also turned something that previously, much like the slap in the face, it turned something that was previously problematic into something productive, because now it is reciprocal. Now I'm in on it, and now I can talk about it, and now we can talk about and it's not just language based. I know that's like where I go, but it becomes an opportunity. It goes from a problem to an opportunity. And the other thing I would just highlight about this example is we're leveraging it, whatever the problem behavior is. Look at all of the stuff you can leverage. You can leverage your knowledge of the child. you can leverage your knowledge of who's in that child's life, and you can leverage knowledge of what you know about autistic brains. And anytime thinking about, it's going to sound funny, but I have lost track of how many times I've been observing a behavior and being like, wow, I wonder why. And it is related to something the child has seen, which just goes to show you, like many children, like most children, they are learning from their environment. They're absorbing information and play schemes up there. They're just doing kid stuff. They're just doing it kind of in a different looking way.
You know, that brings up concerns around like when we model things like, you know, corporal punishment or restraint or seclusion, you know, the things that, you know, kids will pick up as solutions.
Oh, yeah. I think that's hugely important. And one of our overall messages is don't panic. It is, you know, it's important. It is very important that a child not touch a radiator that's hot, right? That's important. It's important that your kid's not injuring themselves and others. That's very important. But the solutions that you come up with when you're in a state of fear, when you're having a fight or flight response, are not going to be your best approach to the situation.
Well, and I know for myself, your mind starts going of what if, like having been in the classroom, like it's impossible. I'm a human being. Your mind starts to go, what if I can't get this under control? What if I can't teach them how to not do it? And when your brain is in that state, as you know, everyone's familiar with, you're not making good decisions when you're stressed. So no matter what the thing is, no matter what the kid is doing, if your goal is to do everything in your power, do your absolute best to support them to something that is positive and helping them learn the skill, calmness is your friend.
I think this gets at the question of that we always hear is like, but how do we prepare them? But what if, you know, how do we teach them to be adults in the world? And it gets back to your point about, you know, you can't always get what you want in life when you're an adult. Well, first of all, you know, I'm working with children mostly, but second of all, like it is what it is, right? Like we can only do what we can do. So I think that we have seen much more generalization of skills when we use this approach than with other approaches, because it becomes they're learning, right? It's a learning rather than a training, if that makes sense. So like you're internalizing these messages that you're sending to the, you know, child that you're working with. It's really, you know, it's much more rewarding for me. And it's also teaching these principles, like you said, we're not modeling punishment. We're not modeling these things that we wouldn't want the child to do. So that I think is just an important.
Yeah, I was just going to bring a comment up from a viewer that said, knowing when the moment isn't the time to learn the expected skill is also important.
Yes,
you know?
that's
critical.
True.
That's critical.
It is critical. And I think that is one of the trickier things about what we're doing is that there does come a time, right? If a child's very upset, there is a point in time where they're not learning. And so you do have to, we'll talk a little bit about that, might as well now, of how you arrange the environment and set up. I don't like doing things artificially, right? So we don't set up situations where we're testing a kid or making, like, I'm not going to wheel the vacuum into the environment to or a picture of a vacuum to get a child used to vacuums, right? Like it's how do you teach in the moment, and how do you expose the child or catch the child in a moment where they're not so upset or doing a behavior where they're able to learn, right?
Really. That's the art form, honestly.
Yeah. So sometimes that is challenging. And honestly, the first step is always to reduce that stress, because you can't teach in that moment. Like that's not when you do it. And so there's arranging the environment and reducing stressors, and having plans A, B, C, D, E, F, you know, all of these things that it takes time. It takes time, and it takes effort, and it is really that's a responsive piece of it. When can you teach versus when do you have to just, resolve a situation? But yeah, these are examples of how we think through hypotheses and alternative hypotheses about a behavior. So it could be, we're framing it as messages because we do this for language acquisition too. So if someone's yelling at the fridge, do they want something in the fridge? Do they want to play with the door of the fridge? Really, it's really, really granular. And these are all real activities that we have worked with. This is a little bit of interpretation in the moment and testing the hypothesis. And then if you're wrong, trying it again and testing out your other hypothesis and providing other opportunities. And that's the back and forth. And again, you're overlaying all of these things. I'm using my behavior to communicate. So I often will, we do this a lot with turn taking because we're in a school. So a child's getting upset and trying to take a toy from another child. I help, we have things that we're like, you can't play with this right now. I'm sitting between the two kids who are trying to get at each other. Let one child play with the toy, then give it to the other child who's waiting their turn and who's really upset, but then they get it after a while. So over time, that message does get through. I'm using language, but I'm also using my body positioning and my literal object that a child wants. So like you have to come up with creative ways of getting your message across. And sometimes the expectation isn't, sometimes I just give up on the expectation, right? So if it's a safety issue, that's not an option. Often if it's an equity issue, it's not an option. But sometimes like the kid doesn't have to keep his shoes on, right? You can have your shoes in a cubby. I don't care about that. Is that important? Does the kid have to be sitting? Often it's just getting rid of adult expectations, which I think is hard, right? It's hard. So we have a lot of these are often language based. So this was a child who was banging on the back door. So we have pictures, so you can use language, provide these things. Okay, here are all the things in the yard that you might want. What is it? Nope, that didn't work. He's throwing the cards. That didn't work. Watching for a reaction and then reacting to it. Okay, so you're pulling me. Show me. I'm going to go with you. Let's see what happens when we open the door. So I want to go for a walk. So we've gotten that far. This kid's getting in a stroller, saying, I want to go for a walk, pulling and pulling and pulling. But then we have another behavior kind of throwing, having an unexpected behavior of yelling or throwing a fit or whatever it is. So you're trying something. I want to walk this way. I want to walk that way. Letting the child lead you when it's possible. It's not always possible. But we have some.
Oh, I was just going to say, going back to that example of like, I find a lot of times if you're envisioning, okay, you're in your house, your kid's pulling you to the door and then you walk one way and they're like, and I'm kind of mad and I'm expressing that. So you go the other way. Sometimes an outside observer might be like, you're letting this kid run your life. You're letting them tell you what to do. You're not. You're having a conversation. That is, if you have a child who is who communicates largely non-verbally without linguistic units, they are in that way. That is how they are communicating. They're saying something to you by dragging you. Then they're saying something else and you're changing your behavior. That's the back and forth. That's the work you're supposed to be doing. And it's not wrong or bad. I just wanted to throw that out there.
And that gets back at the co-regulation piece and all of those really great neurobiology and fight or flight, like understanding all of those things and being able to co-regulate. Sometimes the answer is going to be upsetting to this child. You know what I mean? Sometimes you can't solve the problem. And so
I
being able
can't.
to work through bad feelings and feelings that are not even bad, but like, negative feelings that are, I'm upset, I'm frustrated, that's okay. It's okay. And it still helps to reduce what are these like problematic or challenging behaviors, right?
It's
Because
not about the aesthetic is just what I would say.
Yeah.
Like sometimes the aesthetic is going to be off and it's going to look like you're acquiescing to something or you've given up on an expectation, and others might think that's a failure, that you're not doing good behavior management. I think that's not helpful necessarily as a perspective.
But when you look at this, I mean, isn't a certain amount of this about kind of attunement with the child? I mean, isn't I have to, as I look through what you're presenting here, think that thinking about a setting like your school, as you've gone through this process, this co-construction process, and work through really solving problems, you're understanding and getting to know. I mean, you're becoming more attuned. You're building a relationship. I mean, isn't that really what it's all about? I mean, it's almost, I mean, it's putting priority on us being able to understand communication that may not be our own, right? I mean, isn't that what is at the heart of it, is kind of that attuned, co-regulated presence? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's really truly letting go. It sounds like, I mean, a lot of this is repetitive because the ideas are all good and we can all agree on the ideas. But
Right.
what this looks like in practice is when you really just let go of this idea that you have to be in control at every moment. Everyone has to be safe. That is true.
Right.
And everyone has to, essentially have equity and not be treated badly, or, it's not everyone gets the same thing, but everyone gets what they need, right? But other than that, the expectations are all kind of just, what can I do in the moment? How can I best serve this child in the moment?
Yeah, and maybe even a pinch of acknowledging that neurotypical expectations aren't the only expectations, right? That the idea here is not to have everybody meeting what is a standard neurotypical expectation.
And that is a piece, we didn't talk a ton about it, but depending on who you are as a consumer of this information, some people have really had to do a lot of soul searching about what actually they care about. What is actually unacceptable to me? What is actually unavailable to this?
And I go back, and you should be able to explain why to your child. Why
and if
or
you
can I
can't,
ask you this? It's a fun
you're going
one.
to have problems. If you can't really
And a
clearly
fun
kind of
rule.
simply explain it, I think, oh, and I just wanted to throw out there too, I saw in the chat, Moat's Place said just agreeing that something is not optional is validating. And it can be almost a comfort. It allows the child to get over it because we're not doing this back and forth. But that requires me to know what I will never, ever, and they can sense that, and you won't have to do it for that long. Once that kid knows, oh, okay, 6 times later, this just is not going to happen. The meltdowns become less frequent, less intense, shorter in duration. You see it over time. And and not to say you can't be flexible. You certainly can be. I just said 2 seconds ago, you have to be. But when it's a no, just say it, and they're going to scream and cry. And that's okay. The point isn't for your kid to be happy all the time. You know what I mean? Like, there are going to be upsetting things in this world, and I'm here to help you through it.
But right now, the world is the world for them. It's not the world broadly. That's the other. I don't like living in the future. Not that you never consider it, but they are not adults and they're not operating in the world.
But
they're operating in a
Theo, you can't run around with a knife. You can't.
Yes, right.
I can't let you because I love you.
But a preschooler can, or, someone who isn't, doing a neurosurgeon or whatever, you can't do certain things when you're performing a particular job or whatever. But, someone who's at home can have their shoes off. That's okay. Whatever their age, whatever the issue is, someone who's in
scream, they can wrestle.
Yes, they can jump on a trampoline while they're learning math or whatever it is. Like, these are things that we can all.
Yeah.
I never say never do things, but we don't do physical prompting or withholding items just because I take away things that aren't safe but I give them back often. So again, at home and in the classroom, if someone's using something in an unsafe way, I might remove the item if it's an immediate danger, right? But I don't remove it forever. And I don't say you can't get this back until you can show me a different skill. That back and forth is much more like, I'm going to take the scissors because you are cutting another child's hair with, or whatever it is. Then I will give them back and show you what you can cut, right? So you can cut paper, you can cut this, and then I give them back. And if they go and, we have a lot of boxes with stab marks in them because kids like using scissors and fun, if it's safe, if it's acceptable in the setting, it's fine. Like, we pick our battles. Never would demand a particular communication modality or attempt to direct or shape play. Those expectations are neurotypical and they don't work. You're never going to be able to answer, why do I have to put the doll in the chair and feed it? Why? I don't have an answer to that, and I will engage with you. But those things are just not anything.
That's such a great check. Like, if you can't explain it
without tying yourself in pretzels.
Exactly. Yeah.
These performative tasks that don't mean anything, I would get rid of. And we don't use a lot of rewards. And again, these principles are not things that most people argue about, but like, children should not have to be said, but often has to be said, deserve autonomy and control over what they can have autonomy and control over. We should consider how the kid learns best, how they communicate, what their interests are, and presuming competence, not defiance. And again, if a strategy you're using isn't working, what can you, the adult, do to change it? And again, we use a lot of different modalities, including behavior. This slide, again, just to reiterate, we do think about the future. We do think about having kids become independent and be able to, regulate better. All of these things we want for our children, obviously, but the starting point is to form those relationships and trust. It's not that some kids might, to some degree, rely on other people for regulation into adulthood. That's just true. Right now, all you can do is support them and try to provide that space for them to regulate and be able to communicate more effectively.
I think sometimes we get so focused on like looking at the peak of the mountain, like adulthood and perfect functionality and totally independent, and we forget we're down at the bottom, and that what we need to be thinking about is the next step. Like, you'll never get there if you're focused up here and just operating like forgetting everything that has to come in between. And to move towards, I don't know if folks are familiar with that idea of gradual release of responsibility. It's essentially an idea in developmental practice that it's going to unfold as it will over time, and that we can't force development. We can't strong arm development. It is through acquisition, especially of language, at its core is always social. It's going to unfold as it will naturally over time for your child and every child. And the way to get from here to there is through your relationship, because it's truly the only control you have.
And providing the supports and the scaffolding that the child needs. But a lot of this, I think, comes down to having unrealistic expectations. So this is what we use at our school. Our school is essentially a different environment, right? We tried to, we both came from public schools, and we used a lot of these methods in a public school, but that is an environment it's an institution that's steeped in behaviorism, to be honest. And so this isn't always the optimal setting, isn't always where your child is, right? So we just had this slide to kind of talk around things you can do, and you have a lot of resources about this, guys. So this is just to add to that, what we tell our families to look for in a school where a child can't report what's happening to them.
Anytime we're talking to an audience of people who might have non-speaking, or I feel like we could do a whole other hour on like the language considerations for these populations and the language considerations for echolalic kids in particular. But with any child, just because they have language doesn't mean it's there when I need it. So if you have a child that has unreliable communication, and they are in a setting that's not optimal, I just always would want to tell people there are things you can do to protect your child. I would emphasize that it's not sufficient just to understand the district's policy on seclusion and restraint, because there's often such a cavernous gap between the policy and the reality for those kids, or of what's going on in the school. Be sure you clearly understand how your child's particular setting is defining seclusion and restraint in a functional way. That was a problem we would see oftentimes, is that we'd see, a tremendous number of instances of seclusion and restraint and bring it up, and people would in the school would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. We've never restrained a child, not recognizing a Riften chair is a restraint. And I know that sounds crazy when I'm saying it. It happens. People
just to clarify, it's a restraint if it's used to restrain someone, not if a child needs it to sit up straight. But
so the thing is, in case people aren't familiar with Riften chairs, they're the wooden. They're usually used in with littler kids because they don't make them bigger. And larger children are obviously harder to restrain, but a Riften chair is a chair simply with a strap or a bar that comes down across. They were designed, and this is a sad statement, the Riften company has put out a statement, please stop putting autistic kids in these chairs. They were designed for children with cerebral palsy who required them for physical support to remain upright in a chair because of low muscle tone. That's what these are for.
They're often used to restrain autistic children who don't need them to sit in a chair, but
Correct.
just don't sit in a chair. They don't want to sit in the chair. And so that is something to look for. Rooms that, have restraints that are reflection rooms or calm down rooms or quiet rooms often will be used. So asking those questions and looking for those types of things are things we would always kind of advocate for. And we just have one more example from a school because it's a great example, but we had a student who wouldn't do anything but write numbers. And the expectation of the school was that he would complete his spelling homework. And so we're like, well, maybe he just likes math and we'll let him write numbers on the spelling homework. And we would do math and then spelling. We did all these things. And then observing this child just writing all of these numbers, someone finally figured out he had an alphanumeric code that he was using to do his spelling homework using these numbers. I just thought that was so wild. So
it's a good example of, I never would have thought to do that. And that's not something in all my life I probably would ever think was a fun thing to do. Let me come up with an alphanumeric code to write sentences. The non-autistic brain is just probably not going to do that. So if you can understand, you can start. That's
awesome.
You got a family member.
Yeah, I was like, cool. So that was someone who thinks maybe a little differently, figured that out. But if the answer for this child was just can't write numbers anymore, we can't let him write numbers, which was the answer the school wanted to use. He's reading on like you're missing a lot. And again, every kid is different. Every kid's going to be different. But like, why do you need to do it? Not an alphanumeric code. Like, that's just great. It was a great solution to that problem. And so now, he can write in both letters and alphanumeric code, but that took some time and he thought it was funny. And so that you're assuming that everything is a really serious behavior that's communicating something serious. A lot of the time, some of the most pervasive behaviors that are hardest to get rid of, often it's a humor, like there's humor in there too. And not to forget that not everything is this like, he likes numbers, but it wasn't this, everyone assumed that it was, he's only focused on numbers and he can't not focus on numbers. He thought this was really funny. When someone figured it out, he thought it was great and funny. And that's the relationships piece, right? Like it is funny and it's awesome. So I don't know. It's just not taking everything so seriously all the time too. Now, there are some serious behaviors that you do have to take seriously, but that's not necessarily one of them. Letting some of that go. I think that's it. If there are any questions, that's our.
All right. Well, fantastic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make your slides go away. And you can actually join us back on the screen and hopefully see us.
Right.
And if anybody has any questions, we are close to our time here. But if anybody has any final questions, we'll let you put those in the chat now. And we're getting a couple comments here. So eye-opening. We've got a thank you all. I do want to ask you, so going back to this idea that you started a school, tell us a little bit about the school you started and why you started it. And yeah, tell us a little bit about it.
So right now, we're actually operating a therapeutic program. We're looking for a facility, a physical space to open an inclusive classroom. But we started it actually in collaboration with a parent of an autistic preschooler who just was disappointed in the options that there were for her child in public school settings. And like we said, we had tried to, and to varying degrees of success, use this with individual students in individual classrooms. We brought all these ideas into different settings, but we really wanted to just kind of do it the way we wanted to do it.
And I think there's a tremendous failure of imagination. I don't know who I stole that phrase from. I know it's stolen from somewhere, but there is, of what autistic students are capable of. Even our youngest learners, our most different thinkers. We just felt so strongly, if you could create an environment that, again, would allow for the natural unfolding without force of that child's developmental trajectory. How can I, like any child, support you to develop as you will? What would that look like? And it's been tremendous, the most exciting work we've ever done, I think.
Our school, the name of the school is the Orchid Montessori Center for Inclusive Education, which is in Rhode Island. So we collaborated with a Montessori primary program. So it's ages 3 to 6 right now. And our hope is that eventually we'll expand and open up new classrooms. And we're really excited about it. So this was our first year, and our facility was flooded. So now we're looking for a new facility, but we have one for at least next year. So we're still rolling.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I know that there are probably a lot of obstacles, and I know from talking to you that there have been obstacles that have continued to pop up to make this hard.
But our students are doing great, and it's been so exciting to just see what happens when you have, honestly, a neurodivergent led program with all of these principles really kind of at the way we envision them working. So,
and as we're wrapping up, we took kids who had been, not all of our kids, but probably 40% of our kids had been asked to leave at least one other place. These are failures. These are kids that could not be served in public settings, and they made tremendous, meaningful progress quickly. It was really cool and exciting to see. It's like, if you do all that stuff that we said, it really does work if you can do it.
Yeah. And, each kid's learning at their own pace, but really, I mean, it's been really great to see every single one of our students.
What I wished I could have done was put together like a cookie cutter, a prepackaged, like, here are some activities, or this is the X and do Y. I can't say that, because with each and every one of those kids, it was like, oh, I don't know.
It's really individual. So we have our guiding principles, and then you have to individualize that support. And so that's the harder part, I think. But it does work if you do it. And that's really the great news, is that it can really work.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you each an opportunity to leave us with some final thoughts here as we wrap up. And Sarah, I'm going to start with you. What are your final thoughts, or anything you want to leave people with, or any just kind of your final thought of wisdom for the day? What do you have to share?
The only thing I can think of is, first of all, Steph and I are both on Facebook. We would love to connect with any of you and hear from you, and get your feedback would be absolutely fantastic, because we're really passionate about sharing these ideas and empowering parents to go a different way and travel their own path out there in autism land, which is crazy. But just to also through this, be kind to yourself too. I know that every day was not perfect, is not perfect. Do I overreact sometimes? I sure do. Am I calm always? Nope. But just having you can model self-compassion for your kids too. And just my last thing that I always tell people is, I'm like, what's a smart thing I could say? I know. If you are withholding and not using language with the kid because you don't think they'll understand it, I would challenge that thought by saying, if you don't, they'll never understand it.
And
so
they
that's
might.
why co-construction matters.
Yeah. I would just saying hi to people in the comments. Renee and Maureen. Maureen's an awesome parent, and Renee I know is from, or someone is from Rhode Island who was involved with Spear, which is an excellent organization too. So just a shout out to those two, and just try it. Just put on the low demand and collaborative and proactive glasses and try it for a bit and see if that can work for you, because it really has been very successful for us. So I think that's great.
Yeah, and I go back to one of the comments earlier about persistent curiosity, right? Connection, curiosity, those things are so critical. A couple final comments here to share. Love you girls, and we're thankful for the work that we're doing in this community. Great job, ladies. I enjoyed the presentation. Wonderful. What's your Facebook page?
So we're at AU Included, I believe, on Facebook. Okay. If you search for Autism Included, you will find our Facebook page with our logo, and it is also linked on our website.
Okay, so you said AU Included?
Yes, I believe that Autism Included was taken, but I will double check that and put the right @ on there. But it is linked on our website.
And I just grabbed it as well, just to put it in the chat. So I'll put it in the chat, and it does look like Autism Included. So hopefully I got it right. I did put the wrong link in here. So if you suddenly realize I got it wrong, but it looks like you. So I'll put that in the chat here. I want to thank you both for spending the last hour and 20 some minutes with us today. Really appreciate the work that you do, and I know thinking about kind of the work that you do and the things that you're bringing to the conversation. I'm always, or periodically thinking about people to connect with you. And, I know recently there was somebody who was talking about starting a school. I'm like, you've got to talk to Sarah and Stephanie. You guys are doing great stuff. And I appreciate you coming on to share this. And for everybody else, I just want to thank them for joining us today. And we will wrap up. Stephanie and Sarah, you can hang on for 1 second. We'll catch you after we say goodbye to everybody. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you all so much.